Hey, what's going on, y'all? Welcome back to the show. Appreciate you guys tuning in today. Hope you're doing great. Uh, Sorry to all of you out there that are closing your seasons out. It's been a good one here. It's over. Looking forward to next season. Got a lot of stuff to look forward to. And, shed season's around the corner. So today's episode, we got Zack White. He's joining me. He's actually from Kansas, but he lives in Iowa right now. And this guy is super cool. I've really been enjoying following along on his journey this year. He's done a lot of out of state trips, traveling to many states, Kentucky included. And we get into his stories, and I really wanted to pick his brain on why, what he's learned from traveling to different areas. He's also, been really successful for just really being dedicated to bow hunting for 5 years. And I kind of wanted to see like where he picked up, some of his knowledge and like what he's learned from spending so much time in the woods, because he's very fortunate to be able to spend as much time as he does in the woods. So hang in there. We got a really good episode. It's a little bit longer than what we normally got, but it's totally worth it. We get into some really good stuff. First, let's thank our sponsors that make this thing possible: Lone Wolf Custom Gear, Osseo Gear, Painted Arrow Outdoors, and Timberwolf Supply Company. Guys, I hope you're following each and every one of these companies. If you're going to the Harrisburg show, come see me next weekend. I'll be there with the Lone Wolf booth. We'll be in the Archery Hall. Look forward to catching up to you guys. Always enjoy we feel like we have a lot of, listeners that are in Pennsylvania and Maryland. So appreciate all of you guys coming up and saying, hey. Our quote of the week is actually going to be shared by Zack. He surprised me when we started this episode off and dropped a cool quote that I really liked. So we're going to go with that one. But without further ado, let's get into today's episode with Zack White. So what's up, Zack? Great to have you on, buddy. How you doing today?
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I love talking about this type of stuff. So one of the coolest quotes I ever heard is when you get older, all you have is your stories, and hopefully you have somebody around to listen to them. And I think that's pretty cool. Like to get the chance to come on and talk deer hunting or tell some stories is always fun, and I always enjoy it. So
Absolutely, man. No, I've really enjoyed, just keeping up with you throughout the season online. But we had a conversation recently, just kind of touching up on what we wanted to talk about this evening, man. I really enjoyed it. I think you got a lot to offer, and this will be really cool. Some of you guys might follow Zack online. Some of you guys might not, but just a little background. I mean, he primarily started whitetail hunting in the past like 5 years, and he's done extremely well. And I was really looking forward to just asking some, different questions that we might not ask some of our normal guests. But before we get into that, man, do you mind just doing a little introduction to yourself, a little background, and what's going on with your life nowadays?
yeah, so I born and raised in Kansas, like real small town Kansas, and grew up duck hunting. My dad got me into waterfowl hunting when I was real young, and I just remember following him around on the marsh, like behind a single flashlight. We'd go duck hunting, so I fell in love with that, the birds and all of it. And when I turned 16, got a vehicle, got my own shotgun. My dad actually bought me a Remington 870 for my 16th birthday, and he bought me a lifetime Kansas hunting and fishing license. So that was really neat. Hit the ground running, and fell in love with duck hunting. Because once I could go and do my own thing, and I had some buddies with some decoys, and we would shoot Canada geese out of like dry cornfields and stuff, and that was always fun. And we'd hunt them on ponds and everything. And then I started guiding waterfowl hunts in 2010 and started out real small. And I was actually doing some pro staffing and worked for a company called Avery Outdoors, and they're banded green-headed gear now. And so I got to meet a lot of different people from different states, and some guys would come to Kansas and hunt with us. And one guy was like, hey, man, he's like, you should just start guiding. He's like, you have all the stuff to do it. He's like, you guys hunt every day. And so I went to college for 2 years and then transferred. I lived in Emporia, Kansas at the time. And that's when we started guiding out there, because I didn't really want to finish school. I just didn't really know what I wanted to do. And, if I could make some money guiding duck and goose hunts, that's what I did. So I did that for 10 years, built a lodge, had a really successful company, and sold it in 2020 when COVID came around, and got out of it. And kind of in the midst of all that, I met my wife, Jordan. She was from Kentucky, and she moved out to Kansas, and I gave her a ring. We got engaged, and then once I sold my hunting outfit, she's been a nurse, and she was nursing locally there in Kansas, and she's like, "Man, I really want to take some of these COVID contracts and start traveling." And I said, "Well, let's go. Like we don't have any kids, we don't have a mortgage, so everything kind of lined up perfectly." And so we've been on the road for the past 4 years, and she's the one that got me into deer hunting in 2018 when she moved out there. She's like, "I want to deer hunt." And I was like, "Well, buy a bow." I was like, "I don't deer hunt. I don't." My brothers had started deer hunting at the time, and my brother Nate was really getting big into it and killed some really nice deer. And so I told her, I was like, "Well, buy a bow and we'll go. I'll get some spots." And so that's kind of how I got into bow hunting. And I wanted to get her a buck. The first year we got her a buck. I didn't kill a buck the first year I started hunting, but I fell in love with it, running corn, running trail cameras, and I had a couple spots to do it. And so I fell in love with it, but I didn't really know much. Like it was all just a permanent setup, corn pile, cell cam. You kind of go back to the same spot over and over again. And so, yeah, man, that's kind of the story and how it all got started. But over the last 5 years, this transitioned into hitting a bunch of different states. And my wife and I, we live in Iowa now. We live just right across the river from Omaha, Nebraska into Iowa. And it's really cool out here. It's different than Kansas. There's a lot of big deer here. There's a lot of big deer everywhere you go. Just if they're there on the time when you're
Yeah.
there, any state's got something to offer. And what I like about hitting all these other states really more than anything is just the adventure that goes with it. And we can talk about all this
Yeah,
as we get into
absolutely.
it. So
Absolutely. Yeah, man, it's really interesting, and that's one of the biggest things, and why I wanted to have you is how much you're able to travel and hunt, and how much you get into different woodlots and different terrain, and just kind of like bounce some questions off of you about that kind of stuff. But one thing I had to touch on was, okay, so since your dad bought you that permanent license, or your license forever, since you're not a resident, does it still transfer? Is that
oh
the
yeah,
case?
and
Okay.
not all states are like that. But yeah, so
Okay.
I can buy a Kansas resident deer tag, which is really neat. So it's like $30. But more than
Wow.
anything,
Oh,
now
that's
that
cool.
it's
Yeah.
getting harder and harder to draw Kansas, it's nice to
Hmm.
be able just to know I can have a tag and go back and do
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah. One of my first questions I'm going to ask you is now that you're living in Iowa, I know this is your first year there, but like, what do you think? Do you think Kansas is where it's at, or is Iowa where it's at?
I mean, Iowa's really neat.
Yeah.
People. So the people in Iowa and the people who hunt public and the residents here are extremely spoiled, and they don't realize how spoiled they are with the deer that they have and the opportunities they have. And I get on all the Facebook groups just like anybody else, and you kind of see what people are talking about. And it's interesting because EHD has been a really big deal, and I've talked about this in some other podcasts, but it hit hard here where we're at too. And so, like this summer, I wasn't like overly excited with the deer that I got on camera or anything. It wasn't like I was going to find a 170 or 180 inch buck, and I was like, "Oh, this is my target deer for the year." I was pretty disappointed in that regards, but I kind of fell in love with some certain properties, and that was kind of I made a mistake there. I did spread a pretty wide net, but last year I spent the entire year hunting in the mountains of North Carolina. So when I moved here, I went straight to the hills. I like the terrain. I like the way it funnels deer,
Hmm.
and I can find deer a little easier in the hills. And then I fell in love with some spots. And then once I found a couple deer that I liked, then it was kind of like, okay, well, I'm going to kill deer here. And looking back now, like this year, I'm probably not going to be so heavy running trail cameras early, but I'm going to cast a lot bigger net. I'm going to go like 2 to 3 hours towards the center of the state and make some longer trips out there and get into some different stuff because I think EHD hit this area hard. But to answer your question, yeah, I mean, it's got a lot of opportunities. And I know there's a lot of outfitters that are leasing ground, and I know leases are expensive. And so I got permission on a couple small properties last year. I didn't really end up hunting them too much. But I think those opportunities are out there too. After being here for a year, I'm going to do some things differently next year. But I killed a buck this year, and we can talk about that later too.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
planned on it.
but I mean, I think if I had to choose between Kansas or Iowa, I'd probably pick Iowa. It's different
Okay.
here. It is
Okay.
different here.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I feel like those are two of like the best states you could ever hunt. And you living in Kansas, I just really wanted to kind of get your take on that. So, to transfer over also, when did you first start getting into more of the mobile hunting style? Like, I know you had first started with corn and ladder stands and such. Was it when you really ventured out and started hunting different states? Like, when did you get into that?
It was the second year.
Okay.
So, well, let me think about this. It was the third year I started hunting. So, first year I didn't kill a buck. Second year I hunted most of the season while I leased a spot. Ended up killing a buck like right, I think it was right before Thanksgiving. Killed a really nice 8-point and killed him over corn. I had him on cell camera that morning. There's 3 bucks in there. I was guiding some duck hunters. We had a jam up duck hunt. I told those boys, I was like, listen, I'm going to go shoot a deer tonight. They're like, yeah, go do it. So I ended up getting in there and I shot a really nice 8-pointer, and that was cool. And I was like, awesome. Well, I took the buck and showed the landowner, and I was like, look at this deer I killed. And he told me, he's like, you can hunt it till rifle season. Then when rifle season comes, he's like, we're going to rifle hunt. Well, I showed him the buck, and then after that, the next year, I was like, hey, I want to lease your land. He's like, no, we're going to keep it for the family. And that really pissed me off. And by that time, a couple of years in, I'd started consuming a lot of content on YouTube and everything, just like watching just deer hunting in general, because I don't know about the marked I don't know about
Right.
anybody really. And on YouTube,
Mhm.
I found the hunting public, and those boys really turned me on to the public land. Well, so that's whenever I was like, okay, I can just roam these lands and not have to worry about getting permission or a lease. And so that's
And there's a
the
good
third
bit of
year is whenever,
public in Kansas too,
yeah,
right?
there
Yeah, I
is,
thought
yeah.
so. Yeah.
And so the third year I killed a really nice buck on public. And it's funny too, because I do listen to a lot of Cody DeQuisto's stuff. And that year he was on some podcast talking. He's like, screw cameras. He's like, I'm not running cameras this year. And he's like, if he can do it without cameras, he's like, I'm going to do it without cameras. And so I didn't run a single camera that year, but I ended up
Yeah.
killing a really nice buck on public over some acorns, which was really neat. And then I went up to Nebraska like 2 weeks later and shot a buck in Nebraska on public too. And so that was really cool. Once I went up to Nebraska and did that, like, what was cool about that hunting was in like late October, and a big front moved in. It snowed, and it was only like 3 hours away. And I was like, it's gonna snow, and I was like, it's cold. I was like, I'm going. And I was up there the week before and found an area with a bunch of does, and I'm like, I'm going right back to that area. And they killed a buck that first morning I was in there. And once I got a taste for that, I was like, oh yeah. Well, I bought
Yeah.
that third year, I bought a lone wolf, like an alpha tree stand, bought it off eBay, and bought a set of hawk sticks. And dude, I thought I was the shit, man. I was just gonna hunt every. The problem with in Kansas is there's really a lot of junk trees, a lot of hedge trees and nasty stuff.
Yeah.
So it's not like you can get into these nice, mature, straight trees. But I still was like, my brothers are killing all these big deer on their private spots over the corner. I'm like, oh, I'm hunting and I'm running and I'm gunning, and I was like, this is the shit. And it's funny
Yeah.
looking back at all that now.
That's awesome, man. I love it. And you know what's so cool? I feel like everybody starts with those hawk heliums. It's like the gateway into the rabbit hole of mobile hunting. But what's your setup now, and what are you running? What's your go-to?
Yeah, so I have two setups. Um, I love the Lone Wolf custom gear stuff. Like, I think Andre is the GOAT, top dog in my opinion on anything. I just love his story and
Yeah.
a lot of like the troubles and stuff that he went through and everything too. And I mean, it's been a long road for him to be where he's at today. And so I really support his brand and his story more. I like his story behind the brand more than I like the product, honestly.
Yeah.
But I run three 20-inch double stick steps, and then I run a 0.5 mostly.
Okay.
And then I have another 0.75 tree stand with three 17-inch of the new like V2s, and they're pretty slick too. But I run aiders. I make aiders. I have aiders on all three of my sticks, and so I can get as high as I need to. And I
Yeah.
love hunting high. I know everyone wants to talk, like Cody loves to talk about hunting low and running and gunning. Well, I like getting high. I love
Okay.
getting high. I like to be able to see. And I like my strategy in a lot of these places where I hunt real tight. I love to try to get deer to literally walk underneath me. So I want to be high so I can blow my scent because I don't know where they're coming from, but I'm going to get myself. I'm always going to push the issue and like where these trails are crossing, and I want to get right in the mix of them. Because if I see a deer, I want them to be in bow range, and we can
Right.
talk about that too. So
Yeah. Yeah, man. I think the first thing I want to transfer over to, we'll kind of jump into it that we were talking about before is, where you're seeing a majority of guys making mistakes that you see just from the outside perspective. Like, you haven't been doing this extremely long. And I think you're a really smart, like intellectual kind of person that breaks stuff down a little easier than somebody else does. So I wanted to ask you, where do you feel like a lot of people are going wrong? Like, is it them overthinking it? What's your perspective on that?
well, I think the beauty of what I've been able to do the last few years is I've been able to hunt a ton of different states and see the habitat in different areas and
Hmm.
different public and private ground. And I've turkey hunted a ton in the past too, so like the woods just come natural to me. But where I feel like, Fred Bear said this, he's like, hunt where the deer are, not where you like them to be. And I
Hmm.
feel like in the past when I first started, I would get a piece and I would be like, okay, well, there's deer in here. Like, they're probably bedding in here. They're probably feeding over here. And I would just kind of make stabs at stuff. And in reality, just because there's woods there, just because it looks good, there's probably a good chance there's not deer in there. And so when I first started, you hear people talk like hanging and hoping versus really knowing. And
Yeah.
the last couple of years, what I've fallen in love with more than anything else is scouting. I love to walk. And it's also transitioned, like you have to be smart about that too. People think, oh, I'm just going to barrel through the woods. And I like to slip a lot. I like to get the wind in my face and I like to slip through some spots and kind of really get a feel for what's going on. But where I feel like people go wrong and anywhere they go, if you have a lease or you have private property that's permission or you have public, I feel like people just kind of get tied down to spots. They're like, oh, well, I got this. I know, like maybe you had seen some deer in there in the past, or you killed a buck on a lease, or you killed a buck on your grandpa's farm, and then people want to go back to the same spots because they get comfortable hunting the same stuff, and they're like, well, hang there, regardless of kind of they just hope the thing something's good's going to come out. Well, I think if you want to be really successful at this, even if you just in your home state, the more you can really spend time in the woods, but just you have to just really be honest. The thing that I like about mobile hunting is it makes you be honest with yourself. When you pick a tree like this is where I want to set, well, why am I here? Just because it looks good, or is there several trails coming together that are beat down? There's a fresh rub
Right.
here. I've passed several big rubs, and once you start seeing hot sign and hunting signs, hot sign, the light bulb will come on for you. Everyone has the answers that they're looking for. They just have to really seek it out. And when you mobile hunt, it's like every day you're starting new. You have to just
Yeah.
new. And anything that happened in the past, you can take those experiences, but it's not. I don't know. I guess that's kind of how I feel about it. Like everything that I've done in the past has helped me to get where I am today. But like if I go to Oklahoma tomorrow, I'm starting over new from scratch from the very beginning, and I just try to get in and try to find the hottest sign. And the more you can do that, the better off you'll be.
Yeah. No, I firmly agree with you, man. I think that, and I think a lot of guys just want to pick a spot that they think is right and they go straight to it and they might bypass right past the sign that they need to be hunting. I mean, I think that's one of the hardest bell curves of learning about this stuff is where to hunt the hot side. And it's like, the only way you really do that is by pushing too far and finding out on your own, right? I mean, do you agree with that?
For sure,
Yeah.
100%. I mean,
Yeah.
you'll gain like a gut instinct. I was in Iowa this year, and I took this deep drain. It was like nasty deep, and again going back to the mountains. When I hunted that steep stuff in the mountains, I learned like those deer in some real steep stuff that you wouldn't think. And after I was there for a year and came here, any of the terrain that I hunt or the flat ground or any of the stuff is so much easier compared to those mountains. So those mountains kind of really like shaped me as a deer hunter. But I was in this real steep bottom, and I went straight up this, like, it was straight up, to where this point had come down, and it was a north facing point. And I got up there, and as soon as I got up there, I looked and I was like, this is Bucky. It just was dark. It was just, and I was like, I need to get into a tree. So I sat there and just looked forever. I was like trying to figure out like where I need to get. I walked 5 yards, and sure as shit, a buck just burst up. He was bedded up on a big deadfall right above me. You know, he was watching me the whole time. And as soon as I kind of got into his comfort zone, he burst up out of there.
Yeah.
And you gain that instinct. When you see it enough, you like, okay, this is it. And then it all just kind of comes down to you have to pick the right tree. And then sometimes the battle is how many times can you go back to that same spot to let it produce?
Yeah.
And that's a tricky thing too.
Yeah, I agree with you firmly on that too, man. It's really tough, especially when you do that to like get control of yourself and you're like, all right, well, I know where he is now, but you know, where do you go with that? And I think so many people think that they blew that whole moment right there. But I mean, in reality, like you just found the biggest key to the puzzle. I mean, I feel like finding a good buck to kill is probably one of the hardest things about it is, you know, you spend all this time scouting and maybe you don't see the buck that you're after, but you see him lay down a big rub or, you know, you just don't know. But when you actually get that visual on a deer that you're like shooter, you know, you can put them, you put them in your truck a little easier. I think like just, if you can anticipate, you know, what went right, what went wrong, was the wind in your favor? What was he doing? You know, and now, you know, he's in the area that you're hunting. So it's like game on.
So a big thing that I'll say with any of the states that I've hunted and the information that I've gathered up over these years and doing this is anywhere I go, I always look for horizontal cover. So anytime there's trees blown down, like in a big way, everyone talks about high stem count, and that is true. The does love high stem count, but anywhere there's blow down trees, that's like bread and butter for me. And
Yeah.
that's where that buck in Iowa, he was bedded. It ended up producing for me that bed, but once I found him, there was like another piece of the puzzle. Okay, this is for sure a buck bedding area, and I can go back there next year and maybe end up killing one. But anywhere I find trees laid down where there's a lot of, maybe it's just one deadfall. If it's real big open woods and there's one big tree deadfall, I'm always going to that deadfall. A lot of times you find a scrape around it. A lot of times it's just like a focal point. And the more open the woods are, you know, those can be dynamite spots. But anywhere I go and like just naturally there's a bunch of trees blown down, usually I'm going to find a buck bedding in there. But I used to just barrel through stuff and just pick a couple pins and just go like nonchalant, just go in there and try to bust deer. Well, now I do it a little more strategically. I always try to get the wind in my favor, and I go a lot slower, you know. And
Okay.
so you just really I take my time in there. Ideally, if I'm going in, I do want to scout my way in and find a place to hang and hunt. Well, this year I got so many. Early on, I just kept pushing the issue, and bumped a lot of bucks, and that's cool. But next year, I'm going to try to be a little patient, sit back and do a little more observing versus just blowing right in there and bumping them out. Because, yeah, it's cool to do that, and you learn a lot, but I feel like I was just too aggressive too many times.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I can understand that being, you know, your method, especially being in a new state. Now, were you referring to that just strictly in like Iowa or more like your whole season? Were you
In
just way more
Kansas too.
aggressive?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I bumped a lot of bucks this year, and I could go back and look at that. And early on, because Kansas opens up in like the middle of September, so early on in Kansas, my goal was like I'm going to kill a buck, staging on white oaks before they get into the ag. And so I was getting right up on these oaks, and I just bumped a lot of bucks. And to where now this year I know where those little bedding areas were. I know where the oaks are, so I can just check those trees. And then what I can do is I can do an observation, sit and watch those trees, and hopefully watch a buck coming in there and just figure out how, if I need to shoot them on the ground or what the best play is. But I just kept pushing in there and
I got you.
trying to get right to where I think I needed to be, and then I'd blow them out of there. And I'm like, man, I kept repeating that over and over again. And I was like, I'm finding them, but it's not doing me any good.
Right. Right. Just not the way you want to. I mean, let's recap on your season this year. So you killed like what was it, $3 this year?
I shot 4 bucks, man.
$4.
Wild,
Yeah, that's
wild
freaking
season,
awesome.
man.
One of them here
Yeah,
in
it was.
Kentucky too, which is cool. Now, when you
I
were in,
texted you. I
yeah,
texted you about that,
yeah,
and I was like, "Hey, I'm coming up," and you're like, "Well, it's rifle season." You said, "You might want to think about some of the bow only WMAs," and I said, "Well, I was like, the Orange Army doesn't really bother me because I had hunted some other public spots in Kentucky that are allow rifle, and then the more I got thinking about it, I was like, well, I'm just gonna hit this other spot." And shot a buck that first day in Kentucky and
yeah,
packed my
that was
stuff and
awesome.
drove home.
I was like, man, you don't play. You just come up in here just showing off. Bam. All right, I'm out. On to the next one. I was stoked for you, man. That was cool. I mean,
But
now
yeah,
where you were at around there, like the one thing that really threw me off when I first moved here to Kentucky, there's so many timber cuts around here, and it was something that I've never dealt with in like such a large volume. Like everywhere around here, when I first got started, like it seemed like 3 out of 4 of the wood blocks I go into had major sapling thickets. And I'm like, my friends are like, oh, how's it going? I'm like, man, it's honestly like overwhelming because like I don't know, like, yeah, I'm finding sign, I'm finding these trails, but everything is just so tight quarters. And like when you're going in hunting blind, like it's almost like a crapshoot because for one to get into the middle of that kind of stuff and like get in go through the nooks and crannies, I mean they're bedded all through it, and it's like I was doing the same thing. I was constantly blowing deer out and blowing deer out until I finally found a good chunk of public with good standing timber that like hadn't been cut yet, and it was like I was right back into the stuff that I've always hunted, and I did great. But did you experience any of that, like, and have you experienced that in the South?
in Kentucky or just in
In
general?
general, like I mean, in North Carolina, I haven't really hunted North Carolina much, but I didn't know if that was. I know there's a good bit of timber that gets cut around there too, and there.
Yeah, where I was in North Carolina, there really wasn't any big cuttings where I was. They do some cuttings. From what I've heard, there's a decent herd of elk there now, so they're trying to do a little bit more habitat management catered towards the elk and not so much the deer. It was all big mature trees. I hunted Mississippi this year, and it was a lot of swamp stuff. It wasn't around a bunch of cuttings, which, as I'm learning, and if I knew there were some areas with some recent cuts, I would certainly target on those spots because once they come through and clear cut or whatever the select cut the ground, that's going to provide awesome habitat for deer. So I would look for those spots. Now, if it's a cut that's like 4 or 5 years old, then it's just like a big thicket. That's hard because
Yeah,
it's super tight, like you said, super tight quarters. But if I got into an area like that, what I would look for is like, well, how diverse is the actual block? Is there water through it? Is there ag close by? Or is there just several different variety of trees? Because if it's only like a monoculture, if it's only like one big cut, or if it's just like big mature trees, well, I'm just going to look for the areas that have the most diversity. That's usually where I find the deer. And so basically what I would do is I would just backtrack a little bit and just kind of go naturally to where I'm comfortable with, I
yeah,
like to hunt around water a lot. But no, I never got in. I did in Kentucky get into some like pine thickets that were just like nasty thick, and I would hang into some real tight stuff. And then I hunted on the ground a lot too, but I never connected on those hunts, but I just, the deer are in there, but it's just too hard to hunt.
yeah, yeah, man. I can agree with you. It was definitely challenging at first, like to just break down that barrier of a lot of times I was hunting these areas where there wasn't any ag around, so it was kind of like, well, I figured they'd be in there, but it was really tough to get them on camera. Like I'd finally figured out like the trails, and then by then I was already tagged out. But man, like I felt like I was just a step behind instead of breaking it down a little bit, a next step. But I agree with you, man. I think all of us need to figure out like what we're what our niche is. I think everybody's got however you were raised, wherever you were. I think we all have our own specialty in timber, or, like little, whether it be cornfield, CRP, whatever. Everybody's got different places and different terrain they hunt. So is that something that has helped you when you're doing these out of state trips? Is that what you try to find stuff when you're e-scouting that's similar to what you've done in the past?
Well, not necessarily. Like again, I want to go back to the mountains of North Carolina. Like that, those mountains changed me because the WMA that I was hunting was huge. It was like 4,000 acres. It was huge, and there really wasn't a whole lot of people hunting it. But there was limited access, so there was one spot you could come in from the top, and the rest of it was towards the bottom. And it was, if I wanted to start at the bottom and go towards the top, it was over 1,000-foot climb to get up in there. And so the reason why the mountains changed me was because whenever I picked a spot to go to, I really had to commit because it was just hell getting in there. And then you'd go in there and not see deer, and it was just like a constant battle of hunting these big mature trees and real steep terrain. And I was just bouncing from oak tree to oak tree. There's a lot of red oaks, and I killed a doe over some red oaks. That was really neat. Well, I ended up tagging out. I shot two does and 2 bucks in North Carolina last year. And when I first got to the mountains, I was like, how am I going to kill a deer here? It's like, this
Yeah.
place is huge. And
Mm-hmm.
then you just kind of take a chunk of it at a time. And then basically, what I would do is you just have to try to ride off as much of that property as you can. You find out like a lot of those mature bucks are just not going to walk right through that mature timber. So those areas that are big mature trees, you just X that off. And you say, well, they might come through there in the rut, but
Yeah.
I'm going to stick towards the thicker cover and the steeper terrain. And then everything gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So then I was like, I just need to spend my time based on some trail cameras I was running on these certain areas, and just it was going to be a matter of time for some deer came through. And I killed 2 bucks towards the end of November, kind of like the pre-rut deal. I killed a really nice 10 point. It was the first time I'd ever got a picture of a really nice deer towards Halloween and hunted them the whole entire year. Ended up killing them like right after Thanksgiving. That was really neat. But that was like, that changed me because it just made everything else I look at anywhere else just so it's a cakewalk. Like I got
Yeah.
home to Kansas in the middle of November. I went back before Thanksgiving and hunted back home in Kansas. I flew home and hunted. And I remember the one morning I had a spot pinned, and I was like, I'm going to go look at this oxbow. And I walked in there and marched around, and I just didn't see any big sign. It was in the dark. I was just walking all through in the dark. I didn't see anything I liked, and I walked out of there and got back to my truck and then bounced to another spot. And I got back to looking that morning. I'd walked like 6 miles, and I was just like a blink of an eye. And
Yeah.
my brothers thought I was crazy. Like they're like, "What? What?" And I was like, "It's so easy just to walk across this fat land." It's like I just want to cover some spots, but I wanted to find an area that I was comfortable with, like find something that's tore up with rubs or tore up with scrapes. I was looking for that big buck sign, and I wasn't going to stop until I found it. But
That's awesome.
the mountains just changed me because going up and down that steep terrain over and over again, just kind of blind faith that I was going to do it or get it done, and just made everything else going forward. And I think that's a big reason why I had really high goals for myself this year. I was like, I want to kill 4 or 5 bucks, and I was able to do that. But it was the hard knocks of the mountains that kind of really shaped me. That because it's a lot of work, it's a lot
Yeah.
of work. It's a lot of grind. It's a mental grind, and doing that for an entire year there set me up for this year without a doubt.
Yeah. Do you think it really helped you, in a sense, break down land a lot quicker because you are so used to the big woods and like now, like you could look at a map and it's like, okay, well, here's a wood lot, but like, let me dissect it a little bit easier. And then you'll just speed scout right to where you think you'd need to be at. And it's on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And if you're hunting where there's big deer at, there's a more highly likelihood you're going to find big sign. I
yeah,
mean, and you're hunting some of the best ground that you can. So I can imagine it works out pretty well. And then you're just having fun, just, hitting these other states. I mean, what's the long-term goal, dude? I mean, are you going to try to like break down and hunt every state around? Like, you have any ambitions to do anything like that? Or is that,
well, I want to shoot. I mean, I don't. It's it's interesting to even say this out loud, but I really want to try to. I'd love to chase a 200-inch buck.
yeah,
That's and it's almost like if I need to spend time across Iowa or Kansas and just not even hunt or spend any time until I find a big deer that I want to chase, that so may be it. But my brother Nate, I got two brothers. My brother Nate, he killed 214-inch buck in Kansas. I was with him when he killed it,
Really?
and
Oh man.
it was phenomenal deer. He hunted it the year before and ended up killing it that second year, and that was neat to see. And then my brother Isaac, my younger brother, he killed a 10-pointer, I think 2 years ago now. That was like mid 190s.
Yeah.
And
That's
so
awesome, man.
those boys, my brothers kill big deer. And so
Yeah.
I'm just out here running and gunning on public land, just shooting basket racks, and they're just shaking their head at me. And I just love every minute of it because
Yeah, man.
I've
But you're
never really
enjoying
been,
yourself, you know? I
well,
mean,
I've
what's
never
that worth?
been like yeah, I mean, the God honest truth is like, if you want to kill big deer, you have to hunt where there's big deer. You have to be
Yeah.
blessed with some ground. You have to have deep pockets to get good leases or buy the ground. And that's a whole nother conversation in itself. And
Yeah.
I think it's neat what they do. They're killers, don't get me wrong. But you drop them boys off in Mississippi, they would be lost. And I was lost too, but I was like, at least I had the balls to try it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and going into my experiences from other states, it was like you could walk through some areas and quickly identify like where you find a deer, and then kind of hone in on those spots and spend some time in there. And that's all a guy can do and enjoy that. Like this past year, I had some pretty high goals to like, I wanted to shoot bucks in different states. But the longer I got through the season, it was like I just really enjoy being there more than anything else. Like
Yeah.
I'm not really results driven. You put things on the wall and you say, well, these are my goals and I'd like to do this. And that was certainly in the back of my mind. But I wasn't going to be disappointed in myself if it didn't happen, because it's so fun to do. It's so
Yeah.
fun to run and gun on these deer, man.
It is. It's
And what's
addicting.
wild
It
is,
really once you get into it, man, it definitely grabs you. And I think that's part of the community, man. Like yeah, I touched on it last podcast we did. I was like, there's nothing better than like the bow hunting and the run and gun mobile community. I feel like it's just we're a certain group of people that want to do that, and I feel like part of it is challenging yourself. You know what I mean? And it's just the camaraderie of archery hunting and stuff. It just the challenge of it. It definitely takes a special person to make you want to go through all the heartaches and the shit we put ourselves through too on top of it for a deer. But you got to have it. And what one thing I was excited to ask you about. Actually, two things, but we'll touch on this to kind of tie in with that, and then I'll ask you, what do you think is the difference between the killers and the people that are hunting and not killing big deer? What are one of the biggest character traits you think, or maybe a couple that stick out to you?
um, I think being on, like, I think, like I said it before, mobile hunting and running and gunning it forces myself to be, I have to be honest with myself, you
Yeah.
know? And then you have to be confident. You have to be confident. If I'm not confident in a spot or, a tree or, anything, it's just, I'm wasting my time. I will walk miles until I find the confidence. And that's all sometimes that I need. And then I think that you kind of just have to have a little bit of grit, really, too, just to grind through some stuff. And bow hunting is a mental battle more than anything.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to be there to wake you up in the morning to get up to go. Nobody's
Yeah.
going to, push you over that next ridge, down a bottom, up to the next ridge. Like, you have to have that within yourself. And
I think
I
some
think
people
that
just don't want it as bad as others. Is that what it is? I mean,
I think so.
you know,
Going back to duck hunting. I grew up hunting. You know, the refuge back home that I grew up hunting on was called Cheyenne Bottoms, and it's a 20,000-acre refuge. It's a big marsh. And we had a little duck boat, and we'd go put in there with everybody else. There'd be, opening weekend, there'd be 20, 30 boats that would show up there, and then they'd all put in, and it was just a rat race. And then as the season progressed, guys would come from out of state, and they'd bring these huge blinds, and they would just motor out there and park, and that, just in areas that we'd hunted the whole year, and just knew that, they, you just kind of, you would see, we would just laugh at those big boats, be like, well, they're out there, and they're just shooting a couple ducks, and we're in layout boats, and we're hidden really well, and like everything's dialed about our whole system, and if the ducks were hitting another hole, like, just over the way we could see them, we would pick our shit up and go move over there.
Yeah.
Because we were just set up for that. So I just was naturally able to do that. And I feel like for, I think hunting for a lot of deer hunting for a lot of people, like, they get off work and they're going to go to their lease or their family land. They're going to go sit in the stands that they've already predetermined are good stands. And then they're okay with that. And then if guys hunt public and they find a couple different areas that they really like, then they might fall in love with those spots, regardless if it's good or not. And if you hunt the same spot over and over again, eventually during the rut, a big deer could come through. But people have to really push themselves to just do what other people aren't doing, and push themselves outside the comfort zone too. That's a big part of it. You have to really, just really get after it more than anything.
Being
and
okay
I think,
with the unknown.
Yeah, I like to hunt. I love to travel by myself. I don't want to go with other people because if things aren't working out, like if I'm in a really good area and my buddy's not and he's having issues, I don't want that to be a part of my hunt. You know what I mean? I don't want the weight of him to like affect what I'm doing. And, you get into an area and things aren't going your way, it's easy for guys to get discouraged. And so it's easy to retreat back to what you know or what you're comfortable with. And I think the people who are really successful in doing this, they just have that grit, that determination, that they have the confidence. And I think those are the things that you need. And I think everyone has those. I think everyone has the answers in front of them. I think everyone has and knows what to do. It's whether or not
you're willing to
want to get
listen
up and
to that inner voice that you got.
Yes.
Yeah. No, man, that's solid. I love that. My second question was, what have you taken from your duck hunting? And you did touch on it right there. So that's why I was kind of wondering if you would. What have you taken from duck hunting that you've applied to your whitetail hunting?
The food is a big one.
Yeah.
If you're hunting dry fields for geese or ducks, well, in Kansas where I grew up, there's thousands of acres of dry fields. So it's milo, wheat, corn, soybeans. So those waterfowl, those ducks and geese, are going to go and take refuge on the Cheyenne Bottoms or some of those other refuges around, and then they're going to, when it gets cold, they're going to fly from those refuges and feed in the fields. So then, you and I ride down the road, we go and we glass, and we're like, oh, there's a bunch of geese out there. Well, those geese are in that field because there's food there and they're trying to survive. So they passed hundreds of fields to get to that one, and they're driven because of the food. So then when you and I would go into that field and you break it down, like where we want to hide, like how are we going to hide from these birds, and then how much food in the weather is determined like how good our hunt's going to be. You have to have good weather. You have to have good windy conditions. Ideally, you want sunny conditions. So you and I could go to the same field for a week straight, and then the one day a cold front comes in, it's blowing snow and it's windy. That whole week could be trash. But the one day you have the right weather, you're in the same spot every single day, and boom, you just shoot them. And so it's really weather dependent. So with deer, it's kind of the same, to where, if you're hunting that dry field, you better be on that X. You better be on where the most food is, and then, you be able to hide. And then the more times you can repeat that, the more successful you'll be. In deer hunting, it's similar to the same thing. You got all these places to go, and then you have to determine, like, where is that X? Where is the corridor? Where is he bedding, or where is he feeding at? And you have to put yourself in there. You have to get in there. You don't have to hide in the same way, but you have to, access is a big thing with a whitetail. You have to really be able to access well to get close enough to have an opportunity at these deer. And so that's really the access and all. That's what I'm learning a lot more about than anything else. But those are the direct things that really have lined up for me. And if, like, if we're goose hunting and things don't go well in the morning, we set up you wake up in the morning, set up all these goose decoys, and you have a crappy hunt. Well, then we would just pack our shit up right up the road a couple miles and just do it again. And if all I have to do is like throw a tree stand on my back and then
Yeah.
just grab my bow and go, it's so much easier
Right.
compared to duck and goose hunting. And like,
Yeah.
I think guys that are deer hunting are just lazy or they just don't want it bad enough. I
Right.
think that guys just
No.
like, they get a couple pictures of these big deer and they're like telling their buddies, like, I got this big 8 and this big 10. And then, you know, I don't know that, I can speak for myself. I got a lot of really nice deer on camera this year in Iowa, but it's like, are you disciplined enough to like put in the time and the effort and to those spots and on that deer to kill them? And that's what separates the men from the boys,
Yeah. Yeah, man. I think the cameras have really played head games with more hunters than any new technology we have now. It's totally thrown a wrench in things, and it's honestly kept a lot of people out of the woods in some circumstances and been great for the guys that throw them aside. My trail camera strategy is completely going to change next season from what I have been doing. And I'm going to be a lot like you, man. It's like I'm just going to start throwing random sits in random places and try to break down pieces because that's how I found success here in Kentucky. My first year when I moved here was just, you walk into a piece of public and it's like nobody stepped foot in there. It was like a virgin piece of ground that nobody had touched. And I'm like, just felt bulletproof. You know what I mean? It's a great feeling. And I've had many hunts, in there since in that same area, and it hadn't produced at all. It's been terrible. So to your point, like, don't fall in love with the spot just because you killed a deer in there. It's like I've let cameras soak in there all season, even during the rut, and it's just one of those places, man. It held a good buck at one point, and it's not bad to go scout them, but like, don't just keep going back to the same hole thinking that it's going to happen because it happened there one time. And I've seen a ton of people go and fall into that trap, to tie in with trail cameras. But dude, I got to hear about this giant that you killed this year. And I thought it was in Iowa, but you said it was in Kansas. Do you mind giving us a little breakdown of that?
Yeah, man. I'm glad you asked. I told you I kind of wanted to break down some of my hunts this
Yeah,
year.
yeah, absolutely.
That, I told you when we talked before, um, killing any deer, doe, buck, whatever, like it means a lot to me. Just because, like I don't know, I'm just not the guy that's going to throw a big deer in the back of the truck and just ride up the road. And you know, it's it's just different for me. Killing a big deer or killing a deer is different for me. And my brother had got permission on a place. He farmed for this guy in high school and had moved back. He's back home now, and he kind of retouched with this old landowner. And he's getting older, and so he was just talking to Isaac about helping him just kind of keep an eye on his land and stuff. And he said, if you want to deer hunt, you guys can. He's like, I've got outfitters that are wanting to lease my ground. He's like, I'm not really wanting to do that. He's like, I'll just tell them you have it leased and you can kind of hunt it and take care of it. And Ike's like, cool. Well, my brother Isaac, I gave him that other setup that I said I have, that .75 and those three 17-inch sticks. I said, I take this setup, and I said, just use it this year and run and gun and go kill you some deer.
Mm-hmm.
So once he got his hands on the stuff, he was like, okay, that's cool. Well, this property is kind of got a lot of ag on it and everything, but there's two really big wood blocks on it. And the west side of the wood blocks got some real big oak trees in it. So he had trail cameras on it all year, like watching those does on he determined that the west wood block was all doe bedding. There was some big oaks in there. And then the other wood block didn't really have as many deer in there, but he hunted it. He didn't really hunt it at all. He was just kind of watching. He's like, something's going to show up in there. And he had a camera in each wood block. Well, he got pictures of a really nice buck on the one wood block. And so he went in there and he actually had an encounter with this really big deer. He was going to leave and he was just kind of watching these does. And he's like, okay, I'm just going to sit here and watch these does. This big buck kind of came out of nowhere. He's grunting and stuff. So my brother Isaac's like, holy cow. So he got his bow, grabbed an arrow, and crawled to this big deadfall. He ended up grunting, and the buck looked over. It didn't come to him. And he snort wheezed at him. This buck came right to him. My brother on his knees draws, shoots, hits a limb. This buck's like 15 yards away, misses him. The buck proceeds to stand there for like 30 minutes and just messes around. My brother's videoing on his phone. He has his quiver. He left his quiver behind him. So he calls me. He's like, dude, he's like, I just had the craziest encounter ever with this giant buck. He's like, he was within 15 yards for like 30 minutes, and he's got it all on his phone. And I'm like,
No
man,
kidding.
that's awesome. He's like, what am I going to do tomorrow? I was like, you're going to go right back in there tomorrow and kill him.
Yeah.
And he's like, man, I don't know. And he's like, ho-humming around about it. Well,
He didn't bump
the
him,
next,
right? I imagine he let him
no,
just
because
feed off.
the deer didn't know what was going on.
Right.
And so he went back in there the next morning early, took that stand and those sticks, and he was cutting through this corner, kind of going back to where he'd had that encounter, and he saw a big scrape. And he's like, oh shit, I'm gonna hunt this. So he climbs up the tree over the top of this scrape, and I'm in Iowa, I'm walking to my tree, and I wanted to get in there like gray light. I wasn't gonna get in there real early. So I'm walking to my tree, and I'm like almost there, and all of a sudden FaceTime. And I'm like, what the hell, Ike's calling? He's like, dude, I just smoked him. He's like, I just smoked him. And I'm like, holy cow. I was like, that's awesome. And he's like, yeah, came right to that scrape. And he's like, right underneath me. He's like, I shot right down on him, and I watched him run off in the field, and he died. And listen, I go, hell yeah, man, that's awesome. He goes, I got another deer coming.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right. The buck that he had shot at yesterday came and worked the scrape. He shot a different deer.
Oh, no kidding.
So he shot is over 160-inch 10-point, almost looks identical to the one that I killed.
Really?
This buck, he's got it on video, comes to that scrape, works the scrape. I'm FaceTiming him, watching this deer work the scrape. And he goes, Zach, you got to come home and kill this buck. And I'm like, okay, I will.
Yeah, on my way. See ya. How far is the drive?
So,
what is it? Like 5 hours?
4 hours. 4
okay.
hours. So what's wild, and I can go ahead and just tell the story since we're talking about it. I haven't really talked to anybody about this, but so I climb up in my tree. It's November 1st. It was cold. It had rained. It was just a perfect morning. I brought a lunch. I was like, I'm going to sit here all day.
Mm-hmm.
Sure enough, like an hour later, I had 3 does coming through and right down this trail, and right behind them, like, burr, burr, grunting. I'm like, oh shit, here comes a buck. Yeah. And I'd passed a really wide, like nice mature 8 like a week before, and I was like, oh, that's that 8. He's getting it. So I grabbed my camera, turned it on the trail. The does come through. The lead doe pinned me, so I got my bow in my left hand. I've got my camera in my right hand. I'm just trying not to move, and finally they pass through. So once they pass through and he comes through, I'm not thinking, what deer is this or anything about it. I'm like, go in kill mode. Well, I draw back, and this buck comes right underneath my stand. And as I I realized I didn't stop him. I never stopped the deer. I shoot him back. So this is in Iowa. The same morning my brother killed his buck, I FaceTime him. I'm like, I just killed a buck. He goes, what? I go, I made a horrible shot. And I was like, I gut shot him. I was like, I knew I did. And he ran off and went on to some private ground. So I had to get a landowner in there to help me. He's like, the landowner didn't want me to go and track on his land. I called him. He's like, no, I don't want you to go in there. I got it leased. So I called the warden. He goes, I'll go with you. He's like, legally you can go. He's like, if I go with you and there's blood on his ground, you can go retrieve your deer.
Yeah.
So we went in there that night, found blood, and I was like, I don't want to go any further. I was like, I know I shot him back. And I was like, I want to come back in the morning. He goes, we'll go back in the morning. He's like, you'll probably find him dead. And what's wild about it is my first instinct was like, I want to get a dog, and like, I know it's back, and I'm just replaying all this stuff in my head. I was just like praying. I was like, man, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, this is just bad. And the landowner's like, I don't want you to have a dog in there. He's like, I don't want you to go. But he's like, if you got blood, go ahead and go get your deer. Well, I prayed, and I went back and looked at the footage. Well, the deer that I had shot was just a little basket 8. He's like 110-inch deer, just a lot younger deer than what I'd thought. So I made a mistake there, but I was like, I'm just going to treat this like it's a 180-inch deer. It's like my first deer in Iowa. Like I shot him. I know it's bad shot, but I was like, I'm going to put my time in, and I'm going to walk until I find this buck.
Yeah.
So I went back there the next morning, walked several miles, and I ended up finding the deer. I walked up on him, and he was bedded, still alive. So I walked all the way back out, got my bow, went back in there, got into the area, and killed him. And it was like, kind of like the Lord was like telling me, like, you need to, it's kind of like he was like testing me. He's like, you need to be responsible for what you've done. And it was like, I had these dreams of killing this giant buck in Iowa this year. And here I am like looking at this really small little Basque-Rack 8. And I'm like, I'm going to finish the job on this. I'm going to do him respect and I'm going to pack him out of there. And then, so then I did all that. And then Ike's like, come home. And I'm like, I'm coming. So I had got that deer out of there,
Mm-hmm.
got into a processor, and then it had rained. So then I think
One
it was like
second, I got to
November.
touch on like how much respect I have for you for doing that. You know what I mean? I think there's so many guys out there that would not have said anything about that and would have not recovered that deer, and you did the right thing. So my hat's off to you for that, man. Like,
Yeah, man. Thank you.
yeah,
It was a neat moment because I just, I had really lofty goals this year and I was like, I'm going to kill a giant in Iowa. And it's like, you know, kind of once November hit and I hadn't killed a buck, I kind of got a little nervous and just
yeah.
kind of got in my
You
head
were
about certain things. And I
trigger
made a
happy.
mistake.
Yeah, hey,
Yeah.
man, it
And
happens to all of us. I mean, it's part of bow hunting. It's part of it's part of the excitement. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
yeah,
yep,
you just got to go through some of those heartaches and lessons. But you know what? God was setting you up because I mean,
for sure.
I kind of know where the story ends, but I want to hear it.
So it was, it was a cool experience, like getting another arrow in a buck. Like I was super proud of that because he was bedded there and I come around this bend. I was in this real deep drainage. I come around this bend and he kind of looked at me and I'm like, he'd been there for 24 hours, was still alive. And I was like, man, I got to do this. So like getting my bow and getting back in there and like on my knees and like just drawing on that deer and getting another arrow in him. It was like a really humbling experience, like the most humbling experience I'd ever had as bow hunting. Like,
Yeah,
and so to be able to get an arrow and finish him and just hack him out of there again, like going back to the mountains, like that whole experience of the mountains kind of prepped me for that, like packing the deer out, getting them out of that deep drainage. Took me
yeah,
2 trips. It was miserable. So then that was like the 2nd of November when I got on the processor. A couple days later, I went back and then we hunted the morning of the 5th. We went right to that scrape. He's like, it had rained back home in Kansas, rained a bunch. He's like, we're going straight to that scrape. So
yeah,
we hung in there on that scrape and, you know, 8 o'clock rolls around, nothing. 9 o'clock rolls around, nothing. And like, it was closer to 10 and Ike's like, I'm going to rattle. And I'm like, dude, I was like, we're in the corner of this field. Like, if he comes to us, there's nothing for him. He's not going to see anything. And he's like, oh, just let me rattle. I'm like, all right. So he starts pounding the horns together, rattling, rattling, rattling. So he's filming and I'm just watching. And sure enough, he comes out in this opening. He's like 75 yards away and he's like, he would get a visual on him. And he's looking and looking and looking, and he didn't like it. Well, then a doe crossed over, and so he followed the doe back. And so we're like, oh, he's locked down now. He's got a doe.
mm-hmm.
So we got down, like we sat there till about noon and got down. We took our stuff with us, and I was like, where's the food at? I was like, he's going to follow that doe to whatever ag is. Like, we probably need to move. He's not going to come to the scrape. Let's throw this out the window.
Right.
So we moved around the afternoon. We moved around to the south side of the property because we thought he was going to go south out of this woodlot. And there's a really nice pinch point in there. So we climbed on it and we got another visual on him back in that bedding area. And he was with some other little bucks. They were kind of all messing around, but they didn't end up coming. So we got down again and it was dark 30. And my brother goes, I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight unless we push up into that bedding area and figure out what's going on there. He's like, we got to get in there. And it's his deal. It's his property. It's his place. And I'm only there because he's there. He's like, we got to go in. So,
What's it like? Is it all cedars and like CRP around, or are you in more of a hardwood area?
it's like a hardwood area. It's like
Okay.
big hedge trees and cottonwoods. And the landowner had killed there's a lot of like honey locust trees that got the big thorns.
Yeah.
That landowner went through that whole block and was killing all those trees. So actually, it was like really nice, like a lot of just briars and green briars and stuff that had grown up. So it was a really nice bedding area in there. And
Okay. Cool.
so he was certainly living in there. Well, this creek run through the middle of it. So I was like, we got to go up in there. So, by this time it's dark 30. So we'd hung in the morning, moved, hung in the afternoon and got down. And he's like, we got to go in there. I was like, all right. So we take the creek up to kind of where we'd seen him and come up in there and it's just, just completely dark. And he's like, "That's the tree right there." And I'm like, "What?" He's like, "That's it." It's like, he's like, "That's the tree." And I'm like, "All right." So I was like, "Well, I'll climb and see what I can see for shooting lane." So I get up in there, a couple sticks. I look down, I'm like, "This is it. Like, this is, I
You're
can
in
see a
there.
lot more in here." Yeah.
Yeah.
So we climb up, and I hung the both setups. I put the tree, his .75 behind me so he could film, and I faced to the west, kind of towards that creek bottom. And we go back. He's like, "What time are you want to get in there in the morning?" I was like, "I don't know." But I was like, "I want to get in there pretty early." So he picked me up. Like, we got in there probably an hour before shooting time. And so we just sat in there, nothing, nothing, nothing. We didn't see a deer till about 10 o'clock. And I'd kind of fallen asleep. And Ike looked over my left shoulder and he goes, "He's right here." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, don't move." I'm like, "Oh, crap." So I grab my bow. He comes from my left. And I actually cleared a little bit of a lane to my left so I could shoot this spot. And he comes right through the middle of it. And I'm getting ready to draw back. And I goes, "Just let him come." And I'm like, if I'm by
Yeah.
myself, if I'm by
Yeah.
myself, I'm, and he's filming. So I'm like, okay, he's coming.
Hmm.
So I don't draw, and he comes down underneath us, and there's this big hedge tree there, and his head goes like right behind this big hedge tree, and I stop him, and he stops, but he stops right behind the tree.
Okay. So it's
I'm
blocking his
full
whole
draw.
body. Yeah.
And so his vials are blocked, and I'm just full draw, and he's like, I don't know, less than 10 yards. And I finally just let down. And we sit there and watch him. And he finally, he's like, he's a mature buck. He's just looking around. He didn't see anything. So he kind of comes and he eases out right down to us. And I redraw back on him. And he's just right below me. And I just let it fly. Just kind of put it up just right behind his front shoulder. Arrow zips through him. And my brother just freaks out. We got it all on video, but he didn't
Yeah.
even follow the buck with the camera. He's just like,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Heck yeah,
And
man.
so
That's
that's the
awesome.
biggest deer I've ever killed. And so the buck runs off into that creek and he's like, "Let's just sit here." I'm like, "Okay." So we sat in the tree for like almost 2 hours just chilling.
Yeah.
And that was one of the coolest things that I've ever done, because he goes, "There's no better feeling in the world knowing that you got an arrow in that big buck and he is dead. Like,
Yeah.
there's no doubt."
Yeah.
And so we just kind of sat
Did
there.
you guys watch him die, or you just knew it was a
No,
great
we
shot?
couldn't see
Okay.
him.
Okay.
Yeah, we just knew it was a
You were
great
like,
shot. Like,
let's
I
just sit here
center
and
punched
enjoy
him.
this. Dude,
And
I freaking love that so much. I'm telling you right now that like there's not enough of that goes down. Everybody's in such a hurry to go do this or do that. Like I had a really good talk with one of my good friends, Logan. He killed a buck. We were together this year. And we went and recovered it. And I'm like, dude, just sit here. We're gonna sit here until it gets dark. I was like, there's no better feeling than just this right here. And you never know. You're not promised tomorrow. It's just something that I think everybody listening needs to take and enjoy these little moments, because they're the big moments. If you ask me, they're the ones we'll always remember, especially it being with your brother too, man. Like how cool is that?
yeah, so my brother Isaac and I, we think a lot alike. We fight all the time. And
Because you're
me and
so
my
much
brother,
alike, or what?
yeah, and
Yeah.
my brother Nate too, we argue about shit all the time. We
Uh-huh.
just argue. And so I'd never been with Ike when he'd killed a deer, and I've never he never been with me when I killed a deer. So that's the first time we were together. I've seen my brother Nate kill a bunch of deer. I've been with him just randomly. I filmed him killing a really big buck this year in Kansas. But so it was neat that he took off work, or he had off work to kill, and he killed his buck that first morning. So he had vacation time. So he was off work, no kids, no wife, like nowhere else to be. And he's like, "I just want to sit here." And I'm like, "Let's sit here." So then we got down, tracked the deer through the creek, and he was laying there dead in the creek bottom. I had my nice camera and everything. So we just sat there, took a bunch of photos and stuff. And then we called
Yeah.
the landowner, and he came down and got to see it all. And we showed him the tree we hung in, and just how it all went down. And he loved every minute of that. And so it was neat. And regardless of it, that just because it was the biggest deer in my life, it was a very, very memorable hunt. But, I feel like had that property been like a property my brothers had hunted before, we would have probably been into some of the more permanent stands. We would have never moved like we did.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or there'd have been corn involved. And
Do you think it kind of
so
opened up your brother's mindset a little bit more? Or is that,
100%. Well,
yeah.
he follows what I do. He
Okay.
loves what I do, but
Yeah.
he doesn't.
And everybody's got a different schedule too, man.
They
I
both
understand. Yeah.
Both my brothers have 3 kids, and they're very passionate about just being with their kids and stuff. And what
Yeah.
their wives both know, like when it's time to deer hunt, it's time to deer hunt. But they are very meticulous and just very strategic about when they go in, and when they go in on their spots, they sit there and they wait. And they're not going to go in there unless they know there's some deer they want to kill in there. And it's just
Right.
smaller properties, like. But with all that to be said, had this been a property that we had in the past, we probably wouldn't have made the moves that we did to get to where we were. And
Yeah.
but that goes back to like my style, like it was like a perfect mesh of what he had the property with the big deer to hunt. And then it was kind of like a fearless mentality. Like we had nothing to lose. Let's
You
just
were
go
gonna,
hang in there and
yeah,
see
you
what
were gonna hunt him
happens.
down or kick him out of there, right?
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
was the rut, so we had nothing to lose. We thought he was with the doe, so we're like, well, we better get back in that doe bedding area so when they come back into bed, we'll be close. Well,
Yeah.
he didn't come in with a doe, but yeah, it was neat, and then so that was 2 bucks down, and then I was texting you a little bit, went to Kentucky, trying to think, shot a deer,
Yeah.
shot a little basket rack 8 in Kentucky, and then I went down to Mississippi beginning of January and shot a really nice buck down there in public. So it was a fun year. I learned a lot. I'll probably do some things differently, going into next year.
That was one of
But
my
yeah,
questions I wanted to ask you. What was your biggest takeaway you'd say from this season?
well, I talked about this a little bit, but confidence for me is everything. I have to have confidence.
It is.
It's number one.
I think it's one of the most important things in mobile hunting. Like, if you don't have the confidence, then you're going to be in your head the whole time. And I've told some of my friends, it's like if you don't feel good about it, then keep moving, man. Like, you don't have to sit there just because you got a day to hunt. Like, don't go just sit somewhere to waste an afternoon when you could be scouting and getting over that next ridge. I mean, if you're in a situation and you're hunting public like that, that's the way I'd like to do it. I really did handcuff myself a lot this year hunting some of the places I did. Granted, like, I got on deer several times, and like, I had deer that I was after that got shot, but it's one of those things that one of my bigger takeaways this year was, just staying put, but then to the other extreme, I've got multiple friends that said they were just too mobile and they should have hung back in their state and waited until it happened. But, it's a really tough toss up. Like, do you go on your out of state trips, or do you hang in your state until you kill? Like, what's your perspective on that?
I think that in my opinion, I feel like people are too results driven. Like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I got these target bucks, I got this lease, I got this land, and then they I had a buddy in Arkansas, and he was in this big lease, and he was pumping all his money in this and corn, and he had just all these hogs in there. And I was like, dude, get out of your lease, just hunt public.
Mm-hmm.
And he was spending all his time on this lease because he had money in there, and he's like, this is where I'm going to kill a deer. And he was wasting his time in there.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a problem for a lot of people, is like they predetermine everything, and then they put a lot of time in, if it's food plots or if it's running cameras or whatever. Like,
And then you're
they
there
invest the time
all the
early,
time.
and then they
Yeah.
want it to pay off. Which in
Yeah.
reality, it's like, if you just have an open mind and just like, let me go run into it, find a big buck, and then it's really freeing in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of just really just, I don't know. I just feel like people are just, in my opinion, are just too results driven, and versus just like, I know enough, I'm experienced enough, I'm good enough. Let me find a buck or two I'd like to hunt and spend that and hunt in that area or whatever. But um, that's kind of my take on it all. It's like, if guys would just be more open to anything and not just be like, I have to get this done, I have to do this. I got 2 tags and I want to get one in Kansas and I want to get one in Iowa. It's like, well, yeah, let me put myself in an area that I know I can have success, and I need to be in those areas when the weather and the timing's right. If you're spending a lot of time in those spots when those two things aren't right, you're wasting your time. And
Yeah.
it also takes experience as a hunter, and you have to be honest with yourself about that too.
No, I agree with you, man. That is huge too. It's just hunting the right time too. It's been a real mindset shift for me, owning my own business and being able to, be a lot more flexible and be in the woods more. it's a totally different ball game than like being a weekend warrior. I feel like, because you have the opportunity to hunt, but like you really have to like take the back burner off and control yourself and be like, okay, I know I can do this, but I'm better off waiting for that right time. Or instead of you just going and hunting that evening, maybe it's better for me to go scout a different area. And I kind of think I would have rather this year, I probably should have spent a little bit more time scouting, just trying to find other deer in different areas. But it is what it is. I feel like every year you're going to have your takeaways, things you did right, things you did wrong. But, right now, the last podcast was strictly about that. It's just, breaking down yourself as a hunter and, what did you do right? What did you do wrong? And where can you adjust? And like, I think just being flexible is really what makes, you more of a killer than, a gatherer. But
Sure.
man, it's been a blast talking with you, brother. I've really, really enjoyed this one. I got one final question for you that I really like to ask all of our guests, and that is, what is one of the biggest failures you've had since bow hunting that is really helped, that you've really learned from and made you a better bow hunter?
Well, you know, I am obsessed with trying to pick the right tree. Like the killing tree, people talk about the killing tree, however you want to coin it. Like I don't hunt with a rangefinder. I actually just bought one for the first time this year after I hunted in Kentucky. I bought a rangefinder for the first time ever. So like I am obsessed with getting them close. Like I don't when I draw back on a buck, I never think in my life like how far is he? Should I use my top what pin? I hunt a single pin, keep it at 20, and I'm gonna get him close.
Yeah.
So with that to say, last year in Kansas, on my second trip back, it was after rifle season. It was late December. I was hunting this like big river bottom, and I was just checking crossings. I found a pretty well beat crossing. I come up the river bank, got up there, and as soon as I got up top, I seen a bunch of just big buck dropping. I was like, man, this is hot as anything I can get. So I was like, let me find a tree, get in the tree. I'm setting up on this trail. Sure enough, right at dark, buck comes down, comes to on that trail. He gets behind a tree. I draw. He stops, and as soon as he steps out, he's quartering to me a hard bit, and I shoot, let the arrow go, shoot him forward, shoot him in the neck. Made a horrible shot. Called a dog in. Well, my brothers and I tracked him, ran out of blood. Called a dog in the next day, tracked him with the dog, and we ended up bumping him. And the guy with the dog found him. He didn't bump him with the dog, but he was a couple ridges over, and the deer got up. We were both glassing him. He had a ton of blood on his neck, but it wasn't a vital shot. I went back in there the next day, tracked, put a couple miles on, couldn't find him. Called the dog back in, tracked again. We ended up rolling it like that the deer was probably still alive. And that was a horrible experience for me because I did everything right. Like I was moving, I was just like determined to find the right spot, found the right tree, made all the right decisions. But the lesson that I learned there, more than anything else, and I want people to really think about this, like you have to let those deer get broadside. And when you draw back your bow, you have more time when you have an encounter with a buck and he's in your wheelhouse. You have more time than you ever think to like get that done. By the
Yeah.
time you see the deer and by the time you release an arrow, if you're a video and sometimes it's 10 15 minutes where it's like when your adrenaline picks up and your heart's racing. And so I've been blessed to kill some really nice deer over the last few years, but the one that hurts the most is the one that got away because I did everything right except in that moment I shot him forward and I should have never done that. And so, that's one thing that I think anybody can take away is like when you have that encounter, when you have that bow in your hand and you better think, I'm going to let him get as close as I possibly can and I'm going to wait for him to get broadside before you take that release go. And that's a big thing that I'll always carry with me and really think about. And I think anybody, regardless of the experience that they have, can be reminded of that. And, just always being ready too. Because when, the days you think it might not happen or or whatever the case may be, you better be ready, because more the days when things come together quickly, it's like I'm not ready. And
Yeah.
how easy it to be when you have everything else lined up is just literally just being ready, getting off your phone and being ready in that moment. And when that moment comes, have it in you to make a good shot on that deer, because it's easy to sit outside all day long and shoot your target, but when he's underneath you and he's the biggest buck of your life, you can get it done. You just have to be patient enough and make a good shot on him.
Yeah. No, I love that, man. That's a solid one. And honestly, I feel like everybody, that starts bow hunting, when you get that giant buck, it just comes with hunting big bucks in general. I think we all go through that freak out moment in the beginning stages of it, where it's like, hey, he's close. I can shoot him. You come up with all these reasons to let that arrow fly as soon as you possibly can. And it just comes with time. And it's like, if you can hopefully save somebody the heartache of that happening. But I could not agree more with that statement, man. I've always said I would rather have them, if they are going to be at a little bit of angle, just a little bit quartered away versus quartered too. It's one of my takeaways too. Like, I just hate shooting quartering two deer. But thank you for sharing that, man. That's a solid one, and hope everybody holds on to that.
For sure.
Well, I think we're going to wrap this one up, brother. I've really, I can't thank you enough for spending some time with me, and really, really enjoyed this one. Where can guys follow along with you if they aren't already?
Yeah, they can find me on Instagram. It's Zachary B32. Guys can write me messages if they want to talk deer hunting, talk out of state stuff, whatever. I mean, I get guys that randomly ask stuff and send me stuff all the time, and so I'm always willing to answer people's questions. And yeah, I mean, I've duck hunted and been around hunting and turkey hunting for my entire life, and the deer hunting is newer for me in a lot of ways, but you know, um, I don't know. I love it. I like you said, I like the mobile hunting community. So any if anybody wants to reach out in any way and ask me some questions, I'm willing to help guys out, and it's fun. I'm certainly I've certainly enjoyed getting to meet a bunch of different guys with Lone Wolf too, and it's a cool deal, and just across the board, like you said, it's a really cool community, and um, you know people can connect in so many ways, and so yeah, if anybody wants to reach out to me, they can. But thanks for having me on, dude. It's been fun. It's
Yeah,
it's
man.
cool. We'll have to circle back at some point and get a little bit more into the tactics. I'm
Yeah,
not a big tactical guy. I'm more of like a read and react, or like just more of a I take things at more of like a macro level, but I can fine tune all kinds of different things, like I said, with my setups and stuff
yeah,
that I do. So if we want to dive into that at some point too, we can. But
absolutely. No, I'd love to have you back
yeah,
on, man.
it's been fun. This is the fifth podcast I've done now, I guess, and so it's neat. I'm getting a little bit better about slowing down and kind of being able to tell some details of some stories. But
Yeah, man.
no,
I feel like
I
there's been
I
a ton of takeaways from this one. So I hope you guys are still listening. I've really enjoyed this one. I know I certainly did, but I didn't mean to interrupt you there at the end.
no, you're good. No, it's been fun, man. But thanks for having me on. Like I said at the beginning, this when you get older, all you have is your stories, and hopefully you have somebody around to listen to. And it's kind of neat, think about us, you and I, just sitting in retirement. Oh, back in my day when I was killing all these big
Uh
bucks, and
huh.
it's like, and it's like, it's neat to be able to tell some of these stories, and
It
yeah,
is,
hopefully I
man.
can, and people can take some stuff away from this. But regardless, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, absolutely, buddy. We'll have you on again, man. I can't thank you enough.
Cool, man.
See.